So hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm delighted to welcome you along today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about strengthening your data exposure posture. And I'm delighted to be joined by Gemma Fielding, who is EMEA Marketing Director for Fortanix, and Andrew Mulligan, who's EMEA Partner Director for Fortanix. What we're going to try to do is do this in a relatively interactive sort of a conversational way among the three of us. And what we want to try to do is explore and explain to you and show you the types of things that Fortanix can do from your point of view, and also, just discuss the challenges and issues that people identify and how they work with Fortanix and the types of technologies they use for protecting their data and strengthening their data exposure. Renaissance, we partner with Fortanix. We were delighted to work with Fortanix into the Irish market, and we were delighted to bring the opportunity to talk to you about the various technologies and the options that Fortanix can bring to you. A little bit about the housekeeping today. All attendees are muted for the session. Attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end or during Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, please ping them to me directly or put them into chat or conversation, and we'll look to address those at the end if at all possible. The session is being recorded. There are a number of people who unfortunately were unable to attend, and we want to make the session available to them afterwards, so it will be recorded and made available on demand. So if there are any of your colleagues or people who you believe would benefit from seeing this session, you'll be getting the link after the session, and please share this outside afterwards. So thank you for that. And listen, without further ado, I'd just like to pass on, and let's kick on with the session. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Michael, and appreciate the opportunity coming and talking to you all today. So we wanted to get together and really talk about, as Michael said, that strengthening your data posture, and what that starts with is of course data. Data is everywhere. It's very much recognised now as the crown jewels, the sort of the new oil of a company's strategic approach. But when you do have data everywhere, that also means, of course, that there is exposure and threat everywhere as well too. So we see there's an opportunity for the security team to effectively rise up in the eyes of a business and be seen as more of a strategic enabler for business growth, their innovation and competitive advantage, when being able to focus on securing that data for their operational resilience, but also their business performance and, of course, societal good. And securing data leads to outcomes that enable greater insights and decision making. And when you consider now the sort of use of AI and third-party data collaboration, it offers the ability to showcase greater trust and integrity to both customers and partners, including sort of, business values that are becoming more and more important and prominent and expected of organizations as well. So we see that it's an opportunity for businesses to have an ability to operate in this modern but very complex technological landscape that there is at the moment. We're going to talk that through. It's all being driven by this digital transformation, as well as regulatory compliance and global operations. So what we're going to do today is talk you through some research that we did at the beginning of this year with Enterprise Strategy Group. They surveyed a number of people in the North American market, actually, based on the fact that they were both in the field buying and using cybersecurity. So they were members of IT, cybersecurity, compliance, DevOps teams of a senior level and purchase decision makers. And we wanted to share some of those insights today, but also through discussion that we'll have within this conversation, layer in some things that we're seeing from both the wider EMEA market, but also within the Irish market as well. So in terms of those sort of key highlights that came from this survey that we had, the sort of, you see a couple of them here on the slide here, but I think what's really important to note, and it focused in around how you protect that data, and encryption was very much highlighted around that. Encryption is pervasive and it's growing. There's so much of it that's required now because of this vast volume of data that seems to be growing in the marketplace the more that we introduce more applications. But as a lack of encryption, we are seeing that businesses are struggling with data loss. And that's something that sometimes they're aware of and other times they're not. Whether that's from either malicious sort of ransomware attacks or whether it's due to internal human error within the businesses or indeed within their customer or partner base. So how do we sort of manage that, and how do we progress forwards, especially when you then think about the likes of post-quantum, which is really focusing people's attention whilst in a sort of environment where we don't quite know when it's going to make a real impact at the moment. So there's more things to think about. And as a result of that, what we have seen is that the future spending around data security is increasing. But just because you have more money doesn't necessarily mean that it's an easier decision to make. So we recognize that it's a challenging environment for the cybersecurity professional, and what we hope to do is share some of that information and talk it through. And in fact, Andrew, I'm going to come to you first just to go through some of those key insights from the report. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it was that was learned and what advice, therefore, we can take from that as a cybersecurity professional?
Sure, Gemma. Yeah, so like I think one of the things, and this is this isn't necessarily new, but perimeter-based security is no longer adequate enough. The people are after the data. That's what the target is, and so sensitive data at different organizations is still being lost. I think one of the other things is there was a Microsoft survey run fairly recently within the Irish market, and 70% of Irish organizations who have been surveyed said that they'd experienced some kind of cyber attack previously. And I think one of the problems is that it's also about having the right tooling in place to be able to detect the data loss, so that once something's happened, how do they know it's happened? And then because more often than not, I think we've seen this a lot in the media and the press, is that all of a sudden somebody announced that they've we've had a cyber attack and we've been exposed, and this has kind of been the knock-on effect to it and to that business. I think it's also the difference between sensitive data and data loss. Sensitive data is different to each and every organization. So whether it's like a public sector or to a financial services organization, everything in different markets could be somebody's IP or customer information. It really does it really does differ in that respect. I think one of the other things as well is around ransomware as well, and what we're seeing, continue to see a rise of this is how you've got people coming in, taking the data and kind of holding companies hostage to it, sort of avoid the exposure. And unfortunately, I think, we're going to, that's not going to go away. That's going to, continue, unfortunately. I think also you're going to see, or we will see still, the internal data loss and, and access, people able to access data that they shouldn't be able to. So maybe a good example of this is, when payments are being made and a credit card information, it's not being tokenized, for instance, and is that still being exposed? And then the knock-on effect that has to an organization, to either their reputation or just people's desire to want to do business with them in the future. I think also, and you can see this kind of on the chart there, that we found that 25% had data losses, as part of this survey that we've done. And I think, okay, say 25% had a sensitive data loss, incident. However, what's more concerning is that 75% of those organizations, the other part of it, had multiple data losses. So I think that's probably more of the concerning statistic there, to be honest. So I think, all these things considered, and like I was talking about kind of the effect it has if somebody loses their customer data or their kind of IP, is need to think of how got to consider the impact on brands and then the reputation, and then the people wanting to do business with them again in the future. I was at the event with Michael and the Renaissance guys. They got us to come along to an event that they did a few weeks ago, and I gave an example there, and this resonated really well with the guys as part of the discussion. Was we talked about the Carphone warehouse as an example. So they were part of the Dixon's Carphone group, a well-known brand based across the United Kingdom, and They had a cyber attack back in 2017, and what this was that some malicious a malicious entity gained access to the till network, and so they were able to kind of gain the information of 6 million payment cards, which is obviously quite a lot, as you can imagine. And that is really shows the extent of how large some of these can actually become. And the knock-on effect that had, though, was that if you think about it, you no longer see some of these brands on the high street. And that's because what then actually had to happen was that they had to close some stores because people didn't have confidence in wanting to be able to go in and trade and make purchases through those stores anymore. So stores had to be closed. And then if you'll see on the high street today, you'll just see the Currys brand. So what Dixon's Carphone had to go through was they slowly but surely got rid of those brands, and they now just trade under Currys itself. So it just shows the extent of what they've had to do, to actually get rid of two well-known brands that have been out there for a number of years to actually evolve to something now which we see. But I think that just is a really good example of what some organizations, the extent they have to go to still, be able to recover from things like this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, actually, Andrew, because a lot of people talk around the financial implications, the fines. That's what you typically see within the press. But that's a really good, clear example of where people have voted with their feet effectively, and they've said, no, that's not good enough for me. It's more and more prominent now for businesses to have integrity and trust as their value statements in terms of how they want to be seen as operating within the marketplace. So it's obviously, like you say, it's a challenging environment because we see that there are more sort of statistics around the difficulty of cybercrime. The value of the market is going up exponentially, and the ways in which those malicious ransomware attacks take place are happening more and more. So how did talking through the survey results, how do we find that companies are best to work around the mitigation of this challenge?
Yeah, so I think we saw a large percentage of them. I mean, and you can see from the site here, like 68% said encryption. So if the data's stolen, it can't be used. So that makes a lot of sense. However, it's the complexity that you can kind of get with this. So when and where do you then apply that encryption? So that it doesn't become, a prohibitor for an organization to continue to run their business, be it if they're a retailer or a financial institution, or like I said, public services, serving a community. I think also what we've, again, the complexity of IT environments today, they have changed so much over the recent years with everybody knows about cloud. Every organization has a cloud strategy or multi-cloud strategy, and then they're using infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service. Again, which bits do you encrypt, and where do you encrypt them, and when do you encrypt them? So, these are the questions that I think then an organization has to think about. So it's not necessarily as straightforward as just going, I'm going to encrypt everything everywhere. I think there really has to be some consideration to say what's best for my business and how can I still function as as agile as I do today.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because let's face it, unfortunately, nobody has the budget that allows them to encrypt everything, but also they shouldn't. Because let's face it, not all data is the same, and you shouldn't need to encrypt everything to the same standard. So I think what we've seen through this research is the importance of developing a really formal cryptographic program. And as the survey sort of showed, in terms of 71% said that they had a plan in place. It was well defined, it was established, and there was a dedicated team. What was interesting was that dedicated team had members from across a number of different functions: security, compliance, network, the business itself. Legal obviously becomes more and more important nowadays with the variety of compliance and audit standards. The DevOps team, and trying to get that sort of security really right back at the beginning of the initial stages, through to then the IT ops in terms of maintaining and developing that, and the app development team. So it's a village, isn't it? Let's face it, in terms of being able to deliver that. And those companies that do work as a team, I think, have a far better understanding of what is sensitive data, where that access is needed and who should be seen to see it. And in fact, we were at a CISO event recently, and CISOs were saying that they had business units and the data management teams coming to them and saying, look, can you just say no? Because different members of the team want access to the data, but we just don't want them to. And they felt it was appropriate for the CISO and their team to say that, rather than for them to really properly understand how can that data enable and why is that important. But I think ultimately what that means for the cybersecurity team is, how do you ensure that you don't over or under encrypt your data across the IT landscape? And that's a very complex challenge, and data classification obviously is a huge part of that process. Michael, if I can come to you now, and through the conversations that you're having in the marketplace, you know, seeing where strategic alignments to the C-level, as we found in the survey, takes place. You know, we've also noted that with a recent Deloitte survey, actually in Europe, the chief risk officer has become a really prominent role now. 50% of companies have them, whereas 40% of European firms now have a chief data officer, roles that just didn't exist really before. So as that technology advances and data proliferates and board members are becoming personally liable for financial impact, what are you seeing in terms of the importance of that cybersecurity strategy, how that is enabling that C-level conversation in the organizations that you're talking to?
Yeah, and it's very interesting, and to echo a point that Andrew made there, we're seeing security can be a prohibitor, as EA identifies, if it's not run right, and if it's not, and so it needs to be appropriate. So it needs effectively to be an enabler to do business, but to do business in a sensible, satisfactory manner. And to the Carphone warehouse example, you know, in that case it was a disabler of the business effectively. So if you're the lack of it was a disabler. So by having it in place, we're seeing organizations now taking security and taking compliance and saying, listen, do you know what? We need to be doing the right things for the right reasons, and doing them correctly and appropriately. And I think that's really important. You know, you can talk to a small organization and talk about encryption, this, that, and the other, and whatever. We can't operate like that. So it's got to be appropriate. And when I think what we're seeing now is compliance is absolutely driving the marketplace. The compliance drivers, the DORA, the NIS2, the GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, whatever it may be, you know. And at the end of the day, when we talk and when we hear people talking about compliance, they're probably saying, listen, we need to be doing the right and appropriate things. So it's looking at what's right, what's appropriate for the business, and coming back to your points there about encrypting, but encrypting what's right and not encrypting what's wrong. So all data is not equal. Everything is not equal. So definitely at the board levels, there's a much greater, I suppose, recognition. I won't say understanding necessarily or belief at this point in time, because it's getting there, but there is a recognition that these challenges need to be received at board, recognized at board, invested in at board, and understood at board.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, myself in marketing, you know, I'm far more aware now of the compliance standards than I would have been before around data, you know, whether it's around personal data or the access to data, whether it's GDPR or otherwise. So I do see that different members of the business are becoming more educated, but they don't always think security first. And again, with a recent conversation with a CISO, they were telling us that through a mergers and acquisitions approach, perhaps some of the finance team were promising things in terms of who could share and access data. The marketing teams were promising, yeah, the brand will stay the same, but nobody had actually considered the security that factored into that, and therefore, you know, need to get security and the cybersecurity team involved far earlier, so that when you do bring two brands together, accessing the network for each other and the files and the data points, it can be done, but in a fail-safe way as much as possible. It is that team effort. So when we think about the market forces that are really driving this move to more strategic data security and the approach around that, Andrew, can you talk us through this a little bit more? We've got some great data points here.
Yeah, sure. Look, and I think I touched on a little bit of this earlier as well. I think, the complexity of the infrastructure and how organizations, are continuing to move to the cloud, trying to move out of those data centers. So, I think there's that bit there. I think what we're also, we're seeing more sensitive data is now going to, is going to the cloud. And look, that's going to continue for the next couple of years as well as part of this strategy or transformation programs that these enterprises or multinationals or any kind of organization is adopting. In that, I think once data's in the cloud, it's the applications that are now using that data. So if you've migrated your your database and you put it into a cloud instance, and now rather than it was just being used in one region before of an organization, now if you've got lots of different regions or lots of different countries or just different teams now using that, the effect that that's going to have as well. So it's going to grow, it's going to multiply. So all of a sudden you had a small amount of data, but that's going to just grow and grow and grow. And so you've got that complexity there, but also just the tooling, how, can that cope with it? Can it cope with what's going to happen there? I think also, what we're seeing here is, and you can see this from the statistics, it's the growing use of encryption at rest as well as in motion, with more than, kind of 78%, there over the next 24 months is another good one. The other thing is this, the third type of data is in use. So more encryption and other protection of the data when it's in use itself. So, Fortanix, one of the foundations of the suite of services we offer is around confidential computing, and that enables the protection across each of these different kind of data scenarios. So whether it's in use, in transit, or in rest. And I think it's something as a topic, confidential computing, which is out there more and more so now, and organizations are looking at how can they use that into their kind of infrastructure and into their ecosystems. I think also though, it's where this data resides is now more complex too, with less than a fifth of the business is just on-prem. 67% have got a hybrid cloud environment. So we've talked about multi-cloud, but kind of having this, there's always going to be some applications that are quite sensitive. Maybe it's manufacturing that still need to be hosted locally or ran locally, as well as having those big kind of data crunching applications that are going to be up in the cloud, maybe in Azure or GCP or something like that, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the manufacturing example is very typical around IoT environments, isn't it? And we've actually got another customer in the financial services world who, a big wealth management company, US based, but were struggling with European and in particular Swiss laws around compliance. And their concern was that they were going to have to replicate the entire environment again, which obviously has cost implications, implementation timeframes, but also then the maintenance of that afterwards as well. It was an additional duplicate environment. And obviously there's always that concern then as to whether everything's in sync and everything's working. But the way that we worked with them was that we, through our understanding of what the local laws were and the local requirements were, we were able to provision a sovereign cloud environment. It was a more efficient SaaS solution for them. It replicated a far smaller number of elements of the IT environment rather than everything. So it completely drove down the cost, but also increased that time to implementation. But ultimately it ensured that they had that regulatory standard ticked. They were able to encrypt the data coming in and decrypt it coming back out again, so that everything was as secure as possible. But to their legal requirements, they had everything designed. To their customer standards, they were able to offer the same approach, the same digital environment for any of their customers wanting to access their online banking services across the globe. And that therefore then gave them a far sort of improved user experience. And as a cybersecurity team, it meant that they didn't have two separate standards that they then had to start working to maintain and to continue to look after moving forward. So it's always useful to talk to people who are partnering more locally, who have that deep ingrained knowledge of what those regulatory standards are, so that what is seen as a massive challenge could actually be broken down into sort of smaller parts, which, as I say, hopefully has both cost and time, as well as customer experience benefits along the way. So what we've also seen, if I just now flip onto the next slide here, in terms of compliance that we just talked about, it is being seen as one of the biggest challenges to cybersecurity, especially where a lot of the regulatory standards are overlapping. They're a little bit contradictory. They have dissimilar timeframes around what needs to be done when. Michael, coming to you, in the Irish market, what compliance standards are you seeing that is driving the most activity at the moment in this hybrid, complex IT infrastructure environment?
Yeah, so we're seeing a huge drive toward with DORA and with NIS2, to be honest with you, at this point. And it is interesting when you talk there in terms of the overlapping. You know, once you're doing it is the important thing. And I think you're absolutely right. We've seen lots of drives in terms of overlapping of the various standards there that have been that are in force or have been respected, if you like, or complied to. But once you're doing the right thing, and with this is a conversation we've had with many clients, and saying, well, you know, between DORA and NIS2, what's it? If you're doing one right, you're on a long direction to getting the other. So the important thing is to be doing things correctly and appropriately. And if you're doing things correctly, appropriately, you're doing things right. And I really love the example there when you talk about the Swiss organization. They did what was right for their organization by using the Fortanix technologies, and that's the types of things that we're seeing, the challenges that we're seeing out there. But NIS2 and DORA are by far and away the big drivers out there in the marketplace currently. That's because they're topical currently, and they're not going away. You know, it's just what's the next one coming down the line. So it's important that people are pushing down that way, and we're definitely seeing that marketplace and a lot of people moving in that direction and doing the right thing. Yeah,
and I'm sure, you know, the time frame around that is typically what gets that heated attention around it. I think what we're seeing here is that managing data across this complex IT infrastructure, whether it's your cloud service providers, SaaS applications, databases, being able to manage that both efficiently and scalably, it can be very difficult. We within Fortanix, we refer to something called data exposure management. You know, really understanding what is your data, what's your risk posture, are you exposed, and therefore being able to assess that and strengthen yourselves so that you are compliant, you have the right policy management in place, the right best practice. And if there are gaps and if there are challenges, then having that visibility to be able to remediate against those gaps and be able to act on it. When you are operating in such a highly complex environment, it is difficult to do that unless you have that unified view across your IT infrastructure landscape. So with more data in use across a more complex environment, Andrew, and let's face it, we see things that are only going to extrapolate further in terms of the volume of data, but there's also new technologies and there's also new compliance requirements. So how are you seeing, and what did the research show us, that how are we seeing that businesses are preparing for the future?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think you know, post-quantum cryptography, so you know, with the emergence of you know, supercomputers, kind of much higher processing, you know, post-quantum cryptography, if I put my teeth in, you know, really is the, you know, the possibility of being able to break the encryption schemes more easily, you know, because of this much higher kind of throughput and the processing rates. You know, so for us at Fortanix, you know, we are working with you know, quantum safe algorithms, even though, you know, PQC itself is not 100% understood, and it's still not fully certified, and you know, and the timeframes are predicted as to when it becomes more real and less kind of theoretical. You know, we're working with, you know, some of these the standards and the bodies around the globe to make sure that you know, we are kind of keeping up with it. You know, to the point that Michael was saying is you've got to, you know, you've got to keep going. You've got to try and be pushing on, be at the forefront of this. You know, we do a lot of work with NIST. Is a good example of that, because how do you kind of help customers and different organizations try and stay you know, ahead of this and trying to keep it very much at the forefront. You know, as part of this here, you know, 51% are on a journey to PQC, you know, deployed a solution on production environments or actually testing a solution at the moment. It's that word again, and I think I've used it several times while we've been on here today, is, those complex IT environments means, though, you need to start now, to implement it. If we wait and wait and wait, we're just going to be too late. There was a recent study done by the consultancy company KPMG. They did a cryptography and quantum computing survey. There was some good numbers there. So, 54% of those in the survey said they had they had something in place, and they're working towards quantum resiliency, and it's going to be, they're going to have it in 5 years' time. Trouble is, 5 years' time is probably going to be too late. And again, so we need to act now. Organizations need to have, it's all well and good having a strategy, but you need to be actually, kind of adopting to it and starting to roll that out and starting to live it. I touched on this point again earlier on, is that unfortunately, the bad guys, the hackers, these different organizations, they're taking the approach that they're going, they're gaining access, and they're getting the information now. They're going in, stealing that information, and then when they've got, the ability to use quantum computing, some of this supercomputing processing power, being able to kind of break those standards that have stood for quite some time. So again, that's the risk. So by moving to a post-quantum strategy now, that's going to help to protect organizations, so that like the point we said earlier on, that if the bad guys do get in, and unfortunately the bad guys will still get in, that if they take the data, it's going to be protected, it's going to be encrypted using post-quantum type cryptography, which is of a much higher standard. So I think the message really is that there's a need to do PQC standards now, although they continue to evolve, and they're being rolled out, to prevent the future challenges for any organization, be it a small one or a big, large multinational.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of those, we're not trying to scare around this. It's more a case of fail to prepare to fail, in the sense that because of the complexity, it's something that needs to be looked at now and started to be worked through. And as you mentioned with Fortanix, we're working hand in hand with NIST, looking at those post-quantum algorithms that are being seen to be standardized and certified. There is lots to do, and the timeframes are unknown, but it's important to start thinking about it now and enabling the business around it as much as possible. Obviously, that's balanced with the current here and now, and where organizations are currently planning their cybersecurity investments, and whether this plays a part of it, or whether it's more the sort of urgency of sort of requirements with deadlines for compliance standards over the next year that DORA brings, that Michael mentioned. Andrew, can you tell us a little bit more that the research showed us with regards to the investments that are being made for cybersecurity?
Yeah, sure. So look, as you can see, from the slide as well, so 87% of organizations are saying they're going to be prioritizing encryption in kind of some way. And I think what we're also seeing is that there's going to be much more of a move, though, towards a unified solution approach, so with an increase in budget as well, to ensure a more comprehensive strategy. So organizations want to move away, I think, from just kind of these point solutions. That there's fewer people in teams because costs are being scrutinized that much more. So having kind of a unified solution is something which I think is becoming more and more attractive to different organizations. So from a Fortanix point of view, I think why we do really well and customers like working with us is we have an approach where we can give a unified pane of glass, modernizing the approach for both multi-cloud and on-prem environments, helping customers to have that the same experience across the whole of their IT infrastructure, which I think is a key thing for them there in that respect. Like I said, we have a unified approach, so we have a platform that provides a suite of services offering a variety of different functionality, including TD encryption, tokenization, key management as a service, like I said, all through a single platform with role-based access, which customers really like, and they find it is able to support their organization, their strategy, whether, like I said earlier on-prem, cloud, or hybrid. What we've also seen as well, we recently launched I'm sure that most of the people watching this would have seen it. We've launched something called Key Insight, which for us is, again, is part of the suite of services from Fortanix, but it's about how do you gain a better, discovery, accessibility, and then the ability to remediate, across their kind of security footprint across their infrastructure. So that's something we're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of interest from different organizations on as well now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think ultimately, we're seeing that data is the new oil, but knowledge is power as well. And having that visibility empowers your decisions as to where you then put your investment, but make your transitions and secure yourself as best as possible. Yeah. One of the things that, typically sort of gets brought up in conversations that we're having is that, we've seen that the NCSC give advice around the effectiveness of CSP security standards. And there's, on the flip side, however, been quite a few sort of media announcements around those challenges of, where the CSP environment hasn't quite been as secure as predicted, and therefore the concerns that there are in place at the moment. So when talking to customers, and you might sort of have that sort of pushback, and I ask this to both of you each in turn, why not just use the security standards of the cloud service provider? Andrew, if I come to you first.
Yeah, sure. So, and I think, some of what these guys do is very good, and it fits certain customer needs. But I'd always give the scenario. It's a bit like, there's a need for like separating your keys versus your cloud environment is kind of is a best practice. Otherwise, it's a bit like, I'm going to put my front door keys in the flower pot, or I'll put it under the mat, shall I? Just in case. I think the other bit to it as well is that, how many organizations do we know actually that just use a single cloud? Most organizations in some way, shape or form have a multi-cloud, strategy. So what that means is you need multi-security solutions as well. So, actually, there's the problem again with that, I guess, just thinking about it is, there's no clear view then across all of the solutions and then all of the resources accordingly. So I do think, having another solution which can cope with multi-cloud environments, like you said, we often see that an organization will go, I'm running this in AWS, I'm going to use the data lake function within GCP, and also I'm going to use this database I've got in Azure. So those are quite common scenarios we see more and more today. And so, you need to have something that can adapt with it. You don't want to go, I'm just going to have this one, this one, and this one. And again, you're getting back to that point solution if you're not careful.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. And Michael, what about you? What have you heard from the customers if they bring up this challenge at all?
Yeah, and I think really to echo what Andrew said there. I mean, if you multiple cloud environments, service providers that you're working with, then you have multiple solutions, then you have complexity. I mean, one of the big challenges is resource and skills availability. And I see in a Microsoft survey there recently, 54% of organizations in Ireland said finding skilled cybersecurity staff as challenging or very challenging. So and I think everybody on looking at this at this session here will echo that. So why would you add more complexity? And the whole concept, of having a unified solution which addresses all of your environments, where you have an actual structure, where you have something that you can manage. So if it is sometimes back to the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. Don't make it overly complex. Make it manageable, and then you can actually have an appropriate and secure environment for your organization. And one of the things that we really like, and we've heard has been really liked about the whole Fortanix technologies, is it is a single unified environment which can cover all of the various positions that people may have with the on-prem, with the hybrid, with the single, whatever. So it gives you the capability to build what you need now, or to evolve to where you want to be in a unified environment, and that's really key. So actually managing it yourself in a single structure is probably the biggest thing that we've heard.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that. Okay, well, look, what we'll do now is, before I wrap up with a conclusion, let's open to questions and see if there's anything that's come in through the conversation. Michael, have you got access to any questions there?
Yeah, there's a couple of quick questions here. Just a quick one here. And how are organizations focusing on the emerging challenges in terms of resourcing and understanding their needs for now and into the future? I suppose that's a relatively general one, and maybe throw it out to you both to have a comment in relation to that.
Yeah, so look, I think what we're seeing is kind of the more automation of tasks. So utilizing API calls and things like that for sure, and also just a consolidation of tools as well. Like I touched on earlier on, saying that I think historically, especially in kind of the security or the cyber sphere, there's been lots of point solutions. Because they've gone, okay, we need to do this now, we need to do that, and so I think we'll see the consolidation of tool sets, coming in more and more as kind of how they can then streamline the activity, and then also the skills that are required to be able to operate those. And then also, we touched on earlier on just that, a single pane of glass. If an organization just can have one platform which can then do several things for them, yes, that's kind of, it's easier to procure, but it's easier to integrate into their ecosystem as well, into their operational teams as well. So, kind of just making it easier, more simplistic, and consolidating things down, I'd say, Michael, I think.
Yeah, and from my side, when we were just recently with a set of CISOs in a boardroom session, I mentioned earlier around the whole kind of merger and acquisition period that businesses go through, and there were some CISOs who were saying, we just keep operating as separate businesses because it's so complex, and to bring the two together is incredibly difficult. Whereas if they want to start any net new programs, they then deliver it as like, this is the standard for both. But I think that the challenge there that they then have, and they recognize, and they're trying to bring themselves out of this hole, is that they're just adding workload, and they're not actually seeing where they can consolidate from two different businesses that have come together. How can they consolidate that data security approach? How can they ensure that they've got the same standards across the entire organization? And ultimately, how can they make the day-to-day life easier for the team, so that rather than focusing on being the security breach hotline, they can be seen as more of that business enabler by not just making sure that compliance standards are being met, but seeing where data can be used more effectively to enhance those business decisions for them.
Excellent. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put them through. But I have one more question here, which is, how are organizations aligning their future needs with the demands of regulations and compliance like DORA and NIS2, and I guess potentially into the future with other regulations?
I think, from my perspective, Michael, and I think it's that they're looking at, how do they get ahead of the compliance? So if they see a date that's coming down, so I know you talked about DORA and this too there, you've got the PCI 4.0, which is, the date for that is, I think it's March 2025, so they're looking at how do they, kind of, work now to be, to make sure they are going to be compliant, and I think also they're looking at it geographically. So if you've got an organization that might be working in 2 or 3 different countries, I think they're also looking at, okay, what are the standards in maybe the country that's got the highest standards where they operate. So Germany's a good example. If it's a European organization, they might say, okay, let's look at the standards that our German business has to fulfill, and we could use those as our standards per se, across our business. I think also, we're seeing organizations partnering with vendors who are certified, in those compliances. So if you've got your PCI compliance, for instance, someone who might be in financial services, banking, that kind of thing. So I think there's that the direction working there. I think then, when you sort of just dial it back, is that it's kind of, look, secure the data versus the environment, to help elevate the security posture, I think is the thing. We touched on that earlier on, that perimeter security unfortunately isn't enough anymore. So actually go to what is the key thing you need to make sure that nobody gets their hands on, and secure that. Is probably a really good strategy to take.
Yeah, and just to emphasize on that, different regions, different locations having different standards. We found that in a conversation with one of our customers. They're a large global logistics company, And because of the way in which they operate, typically on a country or region by regional basis, they then have teams in each of those. But then globally, they have what's almost like an internal service provider who runs their security strategy for them. And they absolutely sort of put the standard of, we're going with the German standard regardless. And as a result, they have then completely reduced their exposure risk. They have strengthened their security posture, and they have found it so much easier to justify that across the business. But by doing it across the board as one, rather than each function or each region doing something separately, they've actually found a number of ways in which that can improve their maintenance, their skilling across the team, their rollout of the operation, and that ultimately then has a far improved sort of cost benefits, total cost of ownership benefits, as well as lower downtime to the business if everybody's sort of operating on a different model at a different time frame. So I think being able to have the benefit of having that global view rather than that in-country view can certainly help from a strategic point of view as well.
I think it's very interesting there when you talk in terms of the global view. I think there's virtually no organization that can operate in a silo in terms of a single market these days. There are regulations and implications of regulations and compliance coming from all sorts of areas. So nobody operates in a silo at this stage, and that's for sure. And I think one of the things that, if I can say that take out of this is that, the time is now. Because, as Andrew points out, there's a PCI, there's something else. There's always something else on the horizon, and it's not a question of. And it's sometimes worrying to hear the people say, well, DORA has a date of January 2025 or whatever it is. But you know what? Really, people should be. They should have been compliant. They should have been doing these things. So it's a question of really getting those things done as soon as, and not waiting for the future. Just the future is now, and it is moving ahead. And none of this is just a quick turnkey implement. You need to get your mindset. You need to decide what the date is, etc. So what I would say is, listen, is in the absence of any other questions, immediately it is wrap it here. But very much thank Gemma and Andrew for today's session. I think it was very informative, and hopefully all those watching and listening in have found it very informative. And we'd be delighted to have a conversation and introduce you, get you involved with the Fortanix team with Gemma or Andrew. You can see their details there, and indeed engage any of the Renaissance team. We'd be delighted to be involved in that and to assist you in looking at your journey and what you need to be doing in terms of this. So listen, in terms of keeping your data secure and improving your data exposure posture from now and into the future, we're delighted to get Fortanix to have a conversation with you. Sorry, Gemma, you have something you wish to wrap up here in terms of just where Fortanix is at this point?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the time today to bring us all together. Andrew and myself are grateful for the opportunity to speak with yourself, Michael, and with the wider audience, both those who are with us live now, but also on demand as well. It's great to have the chance to share a little bit more about ourselves and share some survey responses, which hopefully will be of interest, so that it sort of normalizes how some of your customers might be sort of looking at things at the moment, and also through some examples of where we're working with customers at the moment, hopefully gives you some good insight as to who we are and how we can help. But I think in terms of just being able to wrap up, I think as you say, the time is now. The next thing will always come along. Let's face it, we've got the European Union's AI Act that's coming out as well, so that's going to be the next thing that everybody's going to look into. But we do see that there's a huge opportunity, that security is this business enabler, but it's how you really bring that team together to ensure that comes to life and actually fulfills the business as much as possible. We do have this unified data first approach to security by protecting the data versus the environment, and we believe that is the way to improve security posture ultimately, and therefore lower any risk exposure. And as Andrew mentioned, as a pioneer around confidential computing and looking into new ways in how the likes of AI is taking the world forward, we do work with a number of different organisations to ensure that we are always as close to the cutting edge as possible, so that we are underpinning that protection of data in use, in transit, at rest, through the likes of secure enclaves and secure collaboration environments, making sure that we're looking at those PQC ready algorithms, and ultimately just ensuring that our customers feel supported around the adoption of new tech, this new tech for the future that enables business opportunity, but also ethical and societal good as well. So it is exciting. There's lots of opportunity up ahead. It can be scary, but we very much welcome the opportunity to talk through further with those who've come and joined us today. So please do get in touch, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all.